Hello students, this will raise Azizi, your English teacher. There have been some gaps in sending you videos, but I always invited you to come and join the Zoom class so that we could discuss the chapter at the same time and explain you. Anyhow, we have read some paragraphs, and today I'm going to explain you the summary of this chapter because the chapter Mother's Day is only simple conversations, is a play, as I explained to you earlier into two video sessions. So today I'm going to explain you the summary, and if there will be any problem, you can always contact me because we need to move further to complete syllabus as per schedule. And also I would ask you to please read through the chapter from the paragraph where we left in the last video session. So here I'm going to explain the summary from the beginning. As I told you that this is a play and the main characters are Mr. and Mrs. Pearson's family, and there is another lady called Mrs. Fitzgerald who is a fortune teller. So the play begins with two friends, Mrs. Pearson and Mrs. Fitzgerald. They are having conversation at Mrs. Pearson's house. Mrs. Fitzgerald, who is a fortune teller, she is telling Mrs. Pearson's fortune and advises her on it. Mrs. Pearson goes about telling how her family members don't value her and don't appreciate whatever she does for them. She is available for them 24 hours, 7 days a week. And all these family members, her husband, her children, one son and daughter, so all they do, they come and start throwing orders around at her and leave without even saying thank you. On that, Mrs. Fitzgerald tells her to take her stand as the woman of the house, but Mrs. Pearson, being the sweet and innocent lady, doesn't want to bring her family any sort of discomfort, any problem, she doesn't want to basically unplease them. So she continues to handle the orders because she doesn't know where to begin when it comes to making them disciplined. She has been thinking this for a long time when Mrs. Fitzgerald came into the picture, and she asked her, stop doing that. Mrs. Fitzgerald proposes a plan to switch their bodies so that Mrs. Fitzgerald takes her place without her family knowing. And in that way, Mrs. Pearson would become a strict lady and she would not follow their orders. But Mrs. Pearson is hesitant at first, but then Mrs. Fitzgerald convinces her for it. Mrs. Fitzgerald performs her magic that she would learn from the East, and their personalities are changed. So what happened basically, once Mrs. Pearson got convinced by Mrs. Fitzgerald, so she did some kind of magic which she learned from the East, and now their personality, their bodies were changed. So Mrs. Fitzgerald became Mrs. Pearson and Mrs. Pearson became Mrs. Fitzgerald. Now Mrs. Fitzgerald is actually in Mrs. Pearson's body and vice versa. Now new Mrs. Pearson tells Mrs. Fitzgerald to go to her house for the time being. At this moment in the play, Doris Pearson, daughter of Mrs. Pearson, enters in the house in the scene and asking for a cup of tea and ordering Mrs. Pearson to iron her yellow silk cloth. She gets shocked at the sight of her mother smoking, and from there the argument begins. Why she got shocked? Because Mrs. Pearson never smoked before. And as you know, she has become now Mrs. Fitzgerald, who is a chain smoker. So when the daughter, Doris Pearson, saw her mother smoking, she got shocked, and they started arguing on something. And also, what happened, Mrs. Pearson, who is in fact Mrs. Fitzgerald, insults Charlie Spence, the guy who is she about to go out with. So basically, Charlie Spence is supposed to be her friend, and she was about to go out with him. So Doris leaves crying, and Cyril, her brother, enters asking for tea and something to eat. And now he is also amazed at having come to see that there is nothing to eat and no tea to drink. And when he asked if there was anything wrong, Mrs. Pearson told him that she had never felt better. And now and the boy Cyril gets annoyed, and Doris joins him. When they are told that Mrs. Pearson might even take the weekend off, that was another surprise for them. So now, in the scene, the next person enters, who is George Pearson. And who is George Pearson? Mrs. Pearson's husband. So he got also shocked to see his wife day drinking. So when he came, he saw Mrs. Pearson. She was drinking alcohol, and even during the daytime. That was quite shocking and surprising. He announces that he has some special match at the club and that he won't be requiring any tea this afternoon. On being told there is no tea, he gets annoyed again. Mrs. Pearson then mocks him for getting annoyed at not getting something he didn't actually want. She tells him about the names they call him at the club. She further taunts him that this would not have happened had he stayed at home once in a while. After a while, Mrs. Fitzgerald enters. She interferes in their family matters. George gets annoyed again when Mrs. Fitzgerald calls him by his name. So why this happening? Because obviously Mrs. Fitzgerald is actually Mrs. Pearson, and Mrs. Pearson is actually Mrs. Fitzgerald. But just like it had been happening all day, Mrs. Pearson, she just brought George on track. She intended to obviously bring him on track. She just wanted to teach him a lesson. So now Doris enters in the scene again, and she too is not very pleasant to Mrs. Fitzgerald, who is actually Mrs. Pearson. Mrs. Pearson brings her on track too. At this point, Mrs. Fitzgerald, who is actually Mrs. Pearson, loses her cool and asks the family members to excuse the two friends for a moment. She promises them that she knows how to make the situation better. Mrs. Fitzgerald asks Mrs. Pearson to switch their bodies, and while Mrs. Fitzgerald resists at first, but later she agrees to do it. They repeat the process they did in the first place. So If you remember that, obviously they change their bodies, they change their personalities to just to tease these people lesson. The real Mrs. Fitzgerald now explains Pearson how important it is for her to be a bit dominating once, excuse me, in a while, to establish her control and respect. Now the family enters, and Mrs. Pearson suggests that they play rummy and the kids make supper. Supper means obviously meal for the night. Everyone instantly agrees and they are a bit relieved to Mrs. Fitzgerald exit and the play ends. So this is what the summary of this lesson, and I'm sure, as I told you, that the conversations of this play is quite simple and easy to excuse me, understand. But if there is any problem, you can take picture of those lines or paragraph and send it to me. Then I will definitely get back to you. Thank you very much. Enjoy your day ahead. Bye bye.